Mr. President, against this complicated and volatile backdrop, citing the violation against the Druze community and pledging to protect them, between 12 and 16 July, Israel resumed and intensified its airstrikes on Syrian territory.
We strongly condemn the recent large-scale military attacks by the Israeli regime against the Syrian Arab Republic. These deliberate acts of aggression, including those on the capital Damascus, targeted infrastructures and public and government facilities.
The ensuing fighting resulted in hundreds of casualties among the Damascus security forces and Druze fighters, and tragically among Druze and Bedouin civilians, including women, children, and elderly.
This meeting comes against the backdrop of a serious Israeli escalation, manifested in a series of repeated airstrikes on Syrian territories in recent days. It resulted in the martyrdom and injury of several civilians and military personnel and caused severe damage to government facilities.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, thank you, Mr. President, for convening this urgent and important meeting to address the ongoing acts of aggression by the Israeli regime against the Syrian Arab Republic. At the outset, I would like to extend our sincere congratulations to Pakistan on assuming the presidency of Security Council for the month of July. We are confident in your able leadership. We also commend Guyana for its effective and successful leadership of the Council during the month of June. I thank ASG Mr. Khiari for his briefing. Mr. President, we strongly condemn the recent large-scale military attacks by the Israeli regime against the Syrian Arab Republic. These deliberate acts of aggression, including those on the capital Damascus, targeted infrastructures and public and government facilities. This marks a dangerous escalation by a regime that still illegally occupies parts of Syrian territory in flagrant violation of international law and the UN Charter. I wish to make the following points. First, these military attacks happen alongside Israeli ongoing occupation of the Syrian Golan. For decades, Israel has pursued illegal annexation and settlement expansion in this occupied territory, defying the UN Charter and numerous Security Council resolutions. Second, the Israeli regime has become the gravest and serious threat to regional peace and security in the region. This is due to its continued act of aggression and the constant and unconditional political and military support it received from the United States and some Western countries. These states must bear the responsibility for enabling Israel's illegal actions and atrocious crime, which endanger not only the region, but also international peace and security. Third, the attacks on Syria are a direct result of this Council's silence and the international community failure to act. Israel has faced no consequences for its repeated systematic violation of international law and continues to act with complete impunity. This aggression follows Israel's 12-day military act of aggression against Iran in a flagrant violation of the United Nations Charter and international law, with full and unconditional support from the United States. The Israeli regime deliberately targeted Iran's peaceful nuclear facilities under IAEA safeguard, along with civilian infrastructure, including hospitals and residential neighborhoods. This illegal attack resulted in the martyrdom of over 1,100 civilians, among them 41 children and 126 women. 7 hospitals, 11 ambulances, and more than 3,500 homes were destroyed. These undeniable facts reveal the criminal and aggressive nature of the Israeli regime. Fourth, the root causes of instability are clear. Israel's illegal occupation, repeated aggression, systematic and widespread violation of international law and the UN Charter, and the unconditional support it received from a permanent member of this Council. It is time for the Security Council to act. The Council must fulfill its Charter responsibilities by ending Israel's impunity and holding it accountable for its repeated violations. Continued inaction has only emboldened the aggressors. This silence is especially alarming as Israel commits mass atrocities in Gaza, using starvation as a method of war and killing tens of thousands of civilians, including women and children, and systematically destroying vital infrastructure. Only through justice, accountability, and the end of Israeli occupation and aggression can our region move toward real peace, stability, and collective security. Finally, we reaffirm our unwavering support for the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic. We urge the interim government of Syria to fully respect the rights of all minorities and to resolve internal differences through inclusive dialogue and peaceful means. The fundamental principles of the international law and the UN Charter, particularly the prohibition of the use of force, respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, and the principle of non-intervention in the internal affairs of a state must be strictly observed. The Israeli regime has absolutely no legal or moral justification to violate Syrian sovereignty or interfere in its internal affairs under the false pretext of protecting minority rights. Such illegal action constitute blatant violation of international law and the UN Charter and must be unequivocally condemned by this Council. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me as well to thank SG Khiari for his briefing this afternoon. Again today, we find ourselves in an urgent meeting of the Council. A serious crisis has been unfolding in Syria over the last couple of months that too many choose to ignore. The systematic prosecution of minorities in Syria and the dangerous consequences that extend far beyond its borders. But unsurprisingly, that is not why the relevant Council members called for this emergency session today. Instead, they convened this meeting in a politically motivated move to condemn the State of Israel while ignoring the brutal massacre being carried out on Syria's people. Mr. President, over the past 6 months, we have witnessed a return of targeted violence against Syria's most vulnerable communities. Mass killings of Alawites in northwestern Syria, entire villages and neighborhoods wiped out. Then brutal aggression against the Kurds in the north. Just last week, the ancient Mar Mikhael church in the southern city of Sueda was razed, burned to the ground. Just days earlier, armed rebels carried out a deadly assault on another church, continuing their campaign of terror and destruction. And in the past few days, we have seen a new wave of violence being unleashed against the Druze community in southern Syria, a region close to Israel's northern border. The images emerging from that area are horrifying. Civilians murdered and slaughtered in cold blood, communities decimated, elders stripped of their humanity and mocked, cultural heritage erased. This is not incidental. Unfortunately, it is emerging as a pattern. It is a persecution carried out in stages by violent mobs, inflamed and directed by organized jihadist militias, who massacre the Druze population and other minorities who simply want to live their lives. This needs to stop now, and those responsible must be held accountable. Mr. President, what else needs to happen before the members of the international community raise their voice and give their attention, this time in the right direction? What more must we see? Another massacre, another village reduced to ashes, another wave of Druze civilians dragged from their homes and publicly humiliated? Mr. President, in the book of Leviticus, God orders, Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, you shall not stand idly by the bloodshed of your fellow. This is not just our religious obligation, but a moral one. We will not stand idly by as our close brothers and sisters are being slaughtered. This moral obligation is enshrined as formal law in Israel's legal code. And for this very reason, Israel carried out these precise strikes against jihadist militants in southern Syria. Israel's position is clear. We have a commitment to preserve the southwestern region of Syria as a demilitarized area and to prevent the rise of terrorist threats along our border. But we also have an unwavering moral obligation to safeguard the Druze population with whom we share deep historic and national bonds. Their pain is our pain. Their safety is our concern. Just 2.5 months ago, an earlier campaign of violence against the Druze near Damascus was halted because of our actions, both diplomatic and military. And yet here we are again. History has repeated itself in a matter of months. As a result of the actions of Israel this week, a ceasefire was achieved yesterday and the armed forces withdrew to Damascus. Mr. President, let me emphasize, we do not seek to involve ourselves in Syria's internal politics. Our interests are limited, clear and legitimate. We seek to maintain regional stability on our northern border. We are determined to prevent terrorist infrastructure from taking root close to our borders and wherever terror poses a threat. And we are committed to protecting the lives and dignity of the Druze people in Syria who are targeted simply because of who they are. This is also part of our commitment to the Druze community who live in Israel, who are an integral part of the vibrant Israeli society, including its culture and traditions, who are also significant contributors to the safety and security of the State of Israel. To those who speak of winds of change in the Middle East, the international community must act, not only in statements. The international community must act against the perpetrators behind this violence in Syria and hold them accountable. And the international community must make it clear that the persecution of minorities in Syria will not be tolerated. It is not too late, but the time to speak out and to act is now. Let us hope the ceasefire in the south of Syria holds and that our Druze brothers and sisters get to live in peace and prosperity. Thank you, Mr. President.
I now give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, President. I thank you and I thank your team for the swift response to my country's request to convene this emergency session to discuss the consequences of the wanton Israeli aggression on the territory of the Syrian Arab Republic. I also thank the delegation of Algeria and Somalia for supporting our request. I extend my thanks to Mr. Khaled Khayari, ASG, for his briefing. Mr. President, this meeting comes against the backdrop of a serious Israeli escalation manifested in a series of repeated airstrikes on Syrian territories in recent days. It resulted in the martyrdom and injury of several civilians and military personnel and caused severe damage to government facilities. These attacks peaked yesterday, Wednesday, when Israeli occupation forces targeted with the drones and airplanes several official buildings in the heart of the capital, Damascus, including the presidential palace and the staff command building. During rush hour, these attacks resulted in dozens of casualties. The attacks also targeted government headquarters in the governorates of Daraa and Suwaida. The Syrian Arab Republic strongly condemns this blatant Israeli aggression, which constitutes a flagrant violation of international law and the UN Charter, and a violation of the sovereignty of a UN member state. Syria categorically rejects the pretext used by the Israeli authorities to justify these acts of aggression. We affirm that such practices are merely an extension of the occupation's systematic policies aimed at undermining Syria's stability and dragging it into conflict. In a recent month, as you all know, Israel has repeatedly violated the 1974 disengagement agreement by crossing the area of separation and through the incursion into areas in the governorates of Quneitra, Daraa, and rural Damascus, committing violations against civilians, establishing illegal military sites, and seizing natural resources. To add insult to injury, these Israeli attacks directly aim at obstructing the efforts of the Syrian state to restore security and stability and to contain internal tensions through a national approach. This was evident in the painful events in the Suwaida governorate, where state institutions swiftly responded to tensions. They intervened to de-escalate to protect civilians and restore order and stability in coordination with local dignitaries. However, Israeli attacks undermined these efforts and worsened the situation, effectively waging an open war on Syria. Despite the gravity of the Israeli attacks, the Syrian leadership acted with utmost wisdom and responded to American, Arab, and Turkish mediation efforts, whom we thank. These efforts helped prevent the region from sliding into an open confrontation. The Syrian leadership made sovereign decisions based on supreme national interests to preserve the country's unity and the safety of its citizens. It also ensured that it is intent on preventing all violations and holding the perpetrators accountable. Syria affirms that it will not hesitate to fulfill its duty towards all its citizens, especially in light of the compounded challenges caused by security chaos and the proliferation of weapons left behind by the former regime. It will pursue its relentless efforts to enforce the rule of law across the entire national territory and to ensure that weapons remain solely in the hands of the state. Syria is resolute in not going backward. The efforts of the Syrian government received support from Syria's regional and international partners who share our concerns regarding combating terrorism, drying up its funding sources, securing borders, and confronting the scourge of arms and drug smuggling that has plagued the Syrian people and the region alike.
I call on all parties to safeguard infrastructure, providing critical services like water and electricity, and to facilitate humanitarian access to people in need. Mr. President, against this complicated and volatile backdrop, citing the violation against the Druze community and pledging to protect them, between 12 and 16 July, Israel resumed and intensified its airstrikes on Syrian territory. In this respect, I echo the Secretary General's condemnation of Israel's escalatory airstrikes, including on Suwaida, Daraa, and in the center of the capital, Damascus. The strikes targeted the Damascus authorities' forces and official buildings, including the Ministry of Defense and the vicinity of the Presidential Palace, as well as the Mazeh military airport. The permanent representative of Syria has informed the Secretary General and the Security Council in his letter dated 16 July 2025 that these attacks have resulted in casualties among civilian and security forces. Israel also made statements regarding the redeployment of additional IDF troops on the Golan. Mr. President, on 15 and 16 July, hundreds of members of the Druze community from the occupied Syrian Golan and Syrian gathered on both sides of the ceasefire line in the presence of the IDF in solidarity with the Druze community in Suwaida. Some from the occupied Syrian Golan crossed the ceasefire line and traveled to Hadar on the Bravo side before subsequently returning. Mr. President, in addition to violating Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity, Israel's actions undermine efforts to build a new Syria at peace with itself and the region and further destabilize Syria at a sensitive time. It is essential that both Israel and Syria uphold the terms of 1974 disengagement of forces agreement to preserve the ceasefire between both parties and refrain from any action that will further undermine it.
Subscribe to One India and never miss an update. Download the One India app now.